So picture this, a brutal 12-day conflict just wrapped up, and one nation's entire defense network is in shambles. But then, in the shadows, a deal gets made. And here's the twist. No cash changes hands. It's all done with oil. Today we're going to dig into Iran's new shield, a really advanced Chinese missile system, and figure out what kind of waves it's making across the Middle East, and what it tells us about how the global power game is changing.
All right, here's how we're going to break it all down. First up, we'll look at the conflict that kicked this whole thing off. Then, we'll get into the super clever oil for weapons deal that got around sanctions. After that, we'll take a peek inside the hardware itself, the HQ-9B. And finally, we're going to zoom out and connect the dots. What this means for the growing alliance between China and Iran, why other countries are suddenly interested in Chinese weapons, and, the big one, how this whole thing is shaking up the power balance in the region.
Okay, so to really get why this deal happened and why it happened so fast, we've got to go back. Let's rewind to June of 2025, to the conflict that really lit the fuse on all of this.
What happened was, well, it was brutal. In a very short, very intense conflict, an Israeli air campaign just tore through Iran's air defense network, leaving it in ruins. And we're not talking about a small problem here. This was a massive, gaping hole in their security, a vulnerability that they absolutely had to fix, and fix fast.
And if you look at the timeline, it's pretty stark. Israeli forces basically went down a checklist, taking out key Iranian defenses one by one. Even their prized Russian-made S-300 systems got neutralized. So you can bet that the second that ceasefire was in place, Tehran was already scrambling to find a way to rebuild, to plug those gaps.
So that leads to the big question, right? How on earth does a country under heavy sanctions just go out and buy a cutting-edge missile system? Well, the answer is, they didn't really buy it. The secret is in a very simple but incredibly effective trade.
What Iran and China did was use a good old-fashioned barter agreement. You give me this, I'll give you that. By trading goods directly, they just sidestepped the whole money thing. And if there's no money, well then US financial sanctions don't really apply, do they? It's a classic move for getting around these kinds of international rules. And the mechanics of it are actually pretty simple. Iran has tons of crude oil, so they ship that to China, and in return, China sends over the advanced missile batteries that Iran is desperate for. It's a direct swap. Both countries get exactly what they need, and the whole transaction happens completely outside of the Western financial system.
All right, so let's talk about the hardware itself. What is this HQ-9B system that was worth trading all that oil for? Let's dive in and take a look.
So the easiest way to think about the HQ-9B is that it's basically China's answer to the American Patriot system, or the Russian S-400, systems you've probably heard of. We're talking about a serious piece of kit with a range of about 260 kilometers. It's built to shoot down pretty much anything that flies, from jets and cruise missiles all the way to ballistic missile.
And when we say a battery, we're not just talking about one launcher. It's a whole mobile unit. You get a command post, you get a couple of different kinds of advanced radar, one of which can track 100 different targets at the same time, and then you have a bunch of launchers. It can even engage up to 8 of those targets simultaneously. And crucially, the whole thing is mobile. They can pack it up and move it pretty quickly, which is a lesson they definitely learned the hard way in that last conflict.
Okay, but this whole missile deal, it's not just a one-off purchase. You really have to see it as a symptom of something much, much bigger. A strategic partnership between China and Iran that's been getting deeper and deeper for years now.
And if you need one number to understand this relationship, here it is, 90%. That's right, around 90% of all the crude oil Iran exports goes to one place, China. That's not just a trade relationship, that's deep economic interdependence. It's really the foundation for everything else they do together.
And believe me, it goes way beyond just oil. They're doing joint naval drills together. China has been supplying materials that Iran needs for its own ballistic missile program. And there are even talks about Iran buying advanced Chinese J-10C fighter jets. So you see, it's an alliance with a lot of different layers. This missile deal is just the newest, and maybe the most obvious sign of it.
But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Iran isn't the only one shopping for advanced weapons in Beijing. Another major player in the region, and this is a big one, a key US ally, is doing the exact same thing. And that tells you there's a much bigger trend at play here.
Yeah, we're talking about Egypt, a country that gets a huge amount of military aid from the United States. So for them to go and buy the same Chinese missile system, that's a huge deal. It's not just a change in strategy for Egypt, it really points to this wider trend of countries starting to look beyond the West for their military hardware.
So why the change of heart? Well, think about it. When you buy Western weapons, sure, you get alliances and great tech, but you also get a lot of political strings attached, a ton of rules about what you can and can't do. Egypt is a perfect example. They've been trying to get certain advanced missiles for their fighter jets for ages, but the sales keep getting blocked. Then you have China. They come in offering technology that's getting really good, but with way fewer political headaches. For a lot of countries, that's a pretty tempting offer.
Okay, so let's pull all these pieces together. You've got the conflict that created the need, the clever oil deal, the growing China-Iran alliance, and this wider trend of countries looking east for weapons. When you add it all up, what you get is a massive shift in the security situation for the entire Middle East.
And you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to this quote from Israel's defense minister. It really tells you everything you need to know about the level of alarm in the region. For them, these aren't just defensive weapons. They see this as a direct threat, something that's totally upending a very, very delicate balance of power.
But let's ask the really critical question here. Is this new system the magic bullet for Iran? Is this HQ-9B really the impenetrable shield that they hope it is? Well, when you talk to the experts, the picture gets a lot more complicated.
See, analysts describe Iran's air defense system as a hodgepodge. That's a great word for it. It's a messy mix of old Russian systems, some new Chinese ones, and their own homegrown tech. The problem is, these different pieces don't really talk to each other very well. They aren't integrated, and that leaves big, dangerous gaps. So even with this new HQ-9B, they're still likely vulnerable to the most advanced stealth jets, like the F-35. And without a modern air force to back it up, there's only so much this one system can really do.
So that's where we are. We're left with this one big question. Does this new missile system create a new kind of stability in the region by making Iran harder to attack? Or is it just pouring gasoline on the fire, arming one side for the next big conflict that feels almost inevitable? That question, right there, is what's going to define the future of the Middle East.